thank you for considering that. And just very quickly, Regina, give like a 2-minute maybe thumbnail of the title for our newcomers, and thank you for your patience for people who have already been. A little bit of a thumbnail of why the session is named as it is. Can we talk?
Yes. We are often called, receive emails from students or other forms of communication where they ask you, can you talk? We are going to share in a moment a particular scenario about when we received such an email from a student. And talking about this with Kathy, she said, actually, it's not just students who knock at our virtual or physical doors. There are all kinds of stakeholders who ask us, can we talk? And the COVID crisis actually precipitated that and brought a whole emotional dimension was added to this request. Can we talk? So administrators are asking us, as we saw in the first part of this session with John Stark, can we talk? And how the dialogue between administrators and faculty was affected. Charles asked it, among each other, with our faculty peers, can we talk? And we are now started talking about students, and then Marissa and Erin are going to take us to other stakeholders, and Kathy will wrap it up.
Thank you very much. And so our frame, as Regina said, is basically now that COVID has firmly placed the faculty member as sort of the hub of keeping everything together. There's some very interesting research. There's some very interesting popular press stuff about how the faculty member has now become really the most important person in this constellation of how are we going to get this done during a pandemic. And there are some really interesting stressors in a mental health capacity. And there are also some really interesting opportunities. And I appreciated both Charles and John so far framing it not always as this is terrible. It's like an energy sucking machine, which some of us have experienced. But just trying to be mindful of where our emotional energy and our mental health needs are now that we are firmly in the middle of this hub among all of these other stakeholders and relationships. So thanks everybody. So structurally, we'll have some framing comments from each of the panelists on their particular topic. I'm going to send you out to breakout groups, and then we'll come back and be able to have a little bit of dialogue. We have a little bit of a time reprieve that we get about 10 extra minutes at the end of the session. Brandon can keep the rooms open, and last session we did need that time. And so we'll just kind of flow with it. And thank you, panelists. Remember, I'm going to give you the little clapping sign at the 2-minute warning. So Regina's going to talk about students. Thank you.
Yes. I will ask you to actually do an exercise. We start with an exercise before we go to the breakout groups. And it's going to be a visualization exercise. You know how those visualizations that you do, imagine a beautiful lake, blah, 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 and you feel so relaxed. This is the opposite. This is a scenario that's supposed to make you frantic and anxious. So, disclaimer, all right, grab a drink, put your relaxing music because this might stress you. And to make it more stressful, I normally don't have an accent because, I'm this fantastic speaker, but I'm adopting this accent right now just to make it more stressful. Pretending I'm Brazilian. Imagine the following scenario. You are in your office working on a manuscript for JME. I know it's hard to imagine. In 45 minutes, your office hours will be over and you'll be able to fully concentrate on the paper. You normally enjoy talking with students one-on-one. It's part of your ethics of care, your pedagogy of caring. You treasure that moment when the light goes on in their eyes and you see that they have actually fallen in love with organizational behavior. And then months later, they email you asking for a letter of recommendation for a doctoral program in OB, and you feel that, yes, you are living your calling. It was all worth it. But hopefully nobody will come today because you are not feeling very inspirational right now. Chances are, if somebody comes in, it will be to gripe about grades or to tell you that they need an extension of a looming deadline. And then you stop short. There is a knock at your door. Oops, maybe it was a Freudian slip. You do want to work on your paper, but you should not have closed the door during office hours. Another knock, and then a tentative voice. Dr. M, are you there? You recognize the voice. It's Teresa. And now you remember, she sent you an email last night asking if you could talk. And of course, you wrote, yes, please come tomorrow. I have office hours from 10 a.m. to noon, and I'll be happy to see you. Well, that was not the right word to use. You are not actually happy that she's now at your door. In fact, you are concerned about Teresa. Last semester, Teresa was an absolute star in your online section, the introductory OB course required from our MBAs. She was insightful, she was fun, she was curious, she was dedicated, she was incredibly productive. She was discovering OB and reinventing it afresh. All the more remarkable, we thought, because in the self-introduction Teresa had posted in the discussion forum, she had disclosed that she was a single mother, first in her family to go to college, working full-time, and doing her other MBA courses online or in the evening. This semester, you were delighted to finally meet her face-to-face when she enrolled in your evening leadership class. In the first few weeks, she had seemed to be in person the same student you had met online. But then everything started going downhill. Teresa started skipping classes, arriving late, missing deadlines, turning in work that was well below what she was capable of doing. Now, when she comes to class, she seems distracted, sad, struggling to appear engaged. She seems to cringe every time there is an experiential exercise. She seems to be losing weight, but she walks as if she feels very, very heavy, carrying the weight of the whole world on her shoulders. When the semester started, she seemed to always look sharp, ready for anything. Now, more often than not, she seems disheveled, disinterested, not quite there. So it really came as no surprise when her email last night seemed so full of angst, so hopeless. She wrote that she was considering dropping a course, maybe even taking a break from the MBA. It felt like it was all too much, more than she could bear. Before doing it all, she sent you an email. Can we talk? And now here she is at your door. All right. Are you ready? Can you open the door? Are you there? How are you going to react to Teresa? And remember, this scenario was back in the old times when you had an office, a physical office. How does that change in the COVID era? And, it's not the first time that we are called to play a role that we are not prepared for. Anybody here who is a parent can attest to that, right? How did they let you out of the hospital with that baby? But here you're supposed to be qualified. You got a PhD. You're supposed to know the answers. You are used to being in this supposed power role. And now your control is pretty much challenged. And how do we deal with that? And how can we help the students? How can we help Teresa?
I'm a little late. Thank you. I'm a little late on my clap because I was actually really listening to that story. I was like, oh, yeah, I'm supposed to be facilitating here. So Regina has set us up with a scenario and given us some information that is her real scenario. And it's a lot of food for thought. So I'm going to put everybody in breakout groups. And we're going to do 4 rooms and we'll just create some rooms
What is our task, Kathy?
Regina?
Go ahead, Kathy.
So if we're considering, thank you, Suzanne, if we're considering mental health from the faculty's perspective, given the scenario as an exemplar that Regina has shared, we spoke in the prior session of getting these kinds of emails where students are seeking some relatively ambiguous but high touch and pretty general kinds of assistance. And so when somebody says, are you there or are you available? You know, there's some literature out there about texting, are you there? And sort of gaining permission to engage with you in a verbal way. How do you react to that, given what Regina is showing and sharing with us about what appears to be a pretty significant student decline in all kinds of areas of her life? So how do we engage with a student like that and be mindful of our own needs and training and boundaries and mental health issues?
Can I throw out?
Go ahead, Suzanne.
I was going to say, I throw out an idea. You know, I always find it more helpful to role play something like this as opposed to, you know, here's what I would do, here's what I would do. So my thought, and depending on the breakout room, we can choose whether to take that approach or not, to have a couple of volunteers, one be this woman and one be the professor, and, you know, engage for 5 minutes or however long is appropriate, and then open up the discussion. What did we like? What did we not like? What do we think would have worked better and why, and so on and so forth. Just a thought.
I'm going to let people decide that. Role play can be experienced positively and not so much by other people. And I think the goal, I'm a fan of role play, absolutely, but let people can decide. I think that the scenario that Regina is sharing is generic enough to maybe have you think about your own instances. We're not fixing Teresa, we're fixing our own students or engaging with our own students who give us queries like that. I have to think everybody in the room has been asked some version of that question, and maybe much more so in an accelerated way during the pandemic. If you have not been asked that question or been asked to engage with a student in a non-specifically learning way, talk in the chat. Let me know who you are, because I would be surprised by that, and we can do something else. So here you go. So I'm having a little bit of anxiety over the time, but we're going to use that extra 10 minutes. So does someone want to share one, like the coolest thing that happened in your breakout group before we move to Erin and Marissa? Oh, Mary Grace.
Yeah, I was really impressed with how powerful it is when I can work in a system where the university resources people seem to care as much as I want to be able to care, because I do get frustrated when I really genuinely want to hand people to the resources that exist, and then I get afraid that they're not going to pick it up. The resource person isn't going to respond in the same speed or with the tenderness that a student wants. Then I feel obliged, but I'm okay just moving students along to where they need to get to, as long as I trust the system is going to also carry the weight of care.
You know, I think that's a really interesting question with online students. I had a situation last term when several students didn't appropriately annotate their research paper. And this was as COVID was just beginning, and I have a co-teacher, and we didn't know really what to do about it. And now that you mention it, it didn't even occur to me that there might be somebody out there remotely to do counseling with some of these folks, because they were under tremendous pressure. But it just never occurred to me. And I'm wondering how our online psychological services are functioning actually in this era.
Ours went full on virtual, and they were just as overbooked as usual. So that it may be something to look at. Yeah.
And how effective do you think they are?
I don't know. They're better than I am at it, but.
Oh, you're muted.
You got it. Okay. Yeah, and I think they're professionals, and the hard thing for me is when I know that they're so overbooked that the student isn't going to get help for 2 to 3 weeks or 10 days, but they're very effective at creating a space once the student can find space with them. The walk-in hours, I think, were a little bit tenuous in terms of privacy, because like our Zoom pre-registration, in order to protect privacy, there were different means that the counselors needed to use for privacy, but I suspect that meant that names went in the logbooks more often than usual.
Thank you. I'm going to move us along. We can certainly continue in the chat. Please make use of the chat. It's very helpful, I think, for people to be able to read things and see things and go back to things. So let me encourage that. Marissa and Erin are going to talk about engaging the faculty member now with external stakeholders. So, you know, alumni and families and all of those other constellation of people now who are engaging the faculty member as the point person. And so, yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks so much, Kathy, and thanks everyone who's contributed so far. It's been fantastic, and I'm really, Erin and I are really grateful for the opportunity to be part of this. In the course that I teach, it's a large first-year organizational behavior course. To give you some context, I primarily teach between 17 and 18-year-olds, about 300 students per semester. In that context, I get fairly frequently, I get emails from parents, sometimes emailing on behalf of their children. That has increased pretty substantially in the last 6 months, in which we've been dealing with this pandemic, this crisis. And sometimes they're looking for more information. In some cases, they are letting me know that their child has experienced some kind of challenge or difficulty. I had one student attempt suicide this semester, and I had an email from their mother wanting to know how I can provide help to them. In situations like this, I'm not able to obviously disclose anything about the student's progress in the course. All I can do is refer them to university administration and support services. But I am finding that parents are often very happy to email me, and I had one call me. And I think maybe part of that is the fact that students are transitioning from high school to university, most of the students that I teach, and it might be that parents are also going through that transition period as well. So that's been challenging in dealing with parents as stakeholders, and actually having to say to people, I can't give you more information. This is the only information I can provide you with. The other stakeholders I've had the most to do with are alumni, and these are students who have completed my course at some point in the past, and usually they're wanting some kind of letter of recommendation from me. And this has escalated because I think that there's obviously more pressure to go and study, undertake further study, or to go and find work. And some students can be very persistent, and they say to me, I need a letter of recommendation so that I can complete this master's program. When I teach the numbers of students that I teach, I can't say yes to everyone. And I have to say to them, I can only recommend you if I really know who you are. And if I've worked with you in some capacity, or if I really remember you as a fantastic student. Otherwise, I can't really comment on your ability. I can look at your transcript, I can see what your GPA is, but beyond that, I can't comment on work ethic or what your personality is like, or how you would operate, or how you would succeed or not in a postgraduate program. So that can be difficult as well. Sometimes I have to say no to students. In fact, I do that fairly frequently because I don't feel comfortable recommending a student to go and complete a master's degree or a PhD if I don't know who they are. So that can be tricky, trying to navigate that with students and offer alternatives. and say that maybe can they find someone else to write that letter for them. So I'm going to hand over to Erin now because I know that we're pressed for time. Yes, Erin is now going to talk about industry contacts.
All right, thank you, Marissa. And thank you all of you guys for being here today. So Marissa and I work together at the University of Queensland Business School in Brisbane, Australia. And Marissa, she mentioned, teaches in the undergraduate. I actually teach in our postgraduate programs with our MBA students. Regina, that scenario that you just dictated was pretty much a story of my life a little bit. And one of the really important elements with our MBAs and one of the expectations of our MBAs and of people teaching in that is industry connections. You cannot teach that particular group of students without that. And so we always have a lot of alumni that are coming back to us that want to be in contact and have access to our students. We have a lot of industry contacts that want our students to go and work with them. And that's actually part of our work requirements as well. And so trying to maintain those connections and maintain those networks for students as we switch to an online environment really has been a challenge because fewer of our alumni and fewer of our industry contacts actually have those opportunities, but our enrollment numbers are going up and the expectations of those students are going up as well. Many of our students are also either work from home or have been temporarily made redundant. Some of them, actually have lost their jobs. Similar to Marissa, getting a lot of requests for recommendations, even if they were not, particularly the best student. I'm not sure if any of you have had the experience of teaching with MBAs, but they do have they have some very specific personality traits, on things. And so really trying to balance that saying no and dealing with some of the backlash that comes from that as well, because first thing that tends to come up if you say, no, I cannot do this, or yes, I can provide you a recommendation, but it's not going to be a positive one, which I have said as well, very first person that they contact is the dean as well, of how mean you are, how unprofessional you are. And you get caught in this bind between, I like to think that I have a pretty good moral compass in that I'm not going to lie because that's my name that is on that recommendation. And if you do something really stupid with this client or in this organization, that's going to fall back on me and on my reputation and on the university's reputation. But on the other hand, there is that student expectation, and part of what draws people into the program is having those placements. And so, getting that balance right. And I guess that would be one of the questions that I would pose is, how do you balance and keep your moral compass going in the proper direction while at the same time meeting those demands that are being put on you, both potentially by your faculty, by your school and administration, and also by your students. You're kind of caught in the middle, and it's a tug of war. I feel like my arms, which are pretty long to begin with, could stretch my entire house. What was that, like a Flex Armstrong where he was full of jelly and you could pull him all the way across, is about how I'm feeling. So it'd be really interesting to hear your guys' either experience or thoughts of how do you balance your moral compass when in those situations.
It's thank you. Great organizing question. They've given us a lot to think about. And it sounds like it's balancing so many people where the need to say no, which is a little bit of a different frame than the rest of the panelists so far. And not what do we do with them, but what do we do when we can't deal with them. So let me pop you in. This is super fun. And there we go. Thank you.
She's become a Zoom expert now.
Very excited about this. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. Excellent. We have a newcomer in the room. Sorry, I was distracted on the waiting room. So before we get to the families, what's one cool breakout room discussion I heard some fun stuff. John Stark raised his hand.
I wanted, actually, Suzanne, the last thing she was sharing was really something in terms of students that I think a lot of us don't think about. So do I still see her in the room, or did we lose her?
No.
Oh, there she is. There she is. Go ahead.
So all I said was, when we first pivoted to online, I kind of smiled to myself and said, wow, thank God that back in '99, when I had the opportunity to be a first mover and learn the whole online environment, I did. And so for me, this transition was a piece of cake. And I'm not trying to sound full of myself. It was just, I have 20 years experience teaching online and experientially and synchronously and all this other stuff. But the insight that John's referring to is my realization that the students aren't necessarily there. So I had all this comfort being able to teach online, but they didn't. And that even assumes that they all have decent connections. Like, okay, great, Kathy, you're getting really good at getting us into breakout rooms. But I'm watching my class doing a synchronous negotiation class, seeing students literally falling out of the breakout rooms and eventually coming back in because their internet connections aren't stable enough. So it's not just about what we're able to do. It's about, making assumptions about these millennials are so tech savvy. Well, they may not actually be.
I'm hearing that as a theme throughout and among many different sessions, is the assumptions that we're making, not only about infrastructure like internet and technology like hardware, but also about the savviness, about their willingness and ability. So assumptions is a big one. If there's a theme, I think, that I'm hearing throughout all of the sessions that I participated in, it's challenging assumptions, the stuff you can't see anymore. Thank you.
But I think, sorry to interrupt real quick, Kathy, I think it's something that we can do, and I often send emails to my listed students before class begins, and I ask them some questions about what's their experience either in the content area or in this case the delivery area, so that I am better prepared. And I imagine a lot of you do that as well.
Well, it's hard to know what you don't know, and so I think that, at least from my own experience and then what I'm hearing not only at the conference, just throughout, is, wow, I had no idea, ... I had no idea this percentage of students was food insecure. I had no idea this percentage of students has no access to internet unless they go to their rural McDonald's. I had no idea they couldn't have access to medication unless they're on campus. And so it's this whole universe of things that I think we're learning about our students, and tech savviness and comfort with technology, I think, is only one of those.
Yeah, and there's even second level assumptions. I know when we immediately went online, and we're Philadelphia. I mean, we could literally see the Comcast tower from our university. We can see the headquarters of Comcast. And so internally the conversation was, well, we're sending our students home, and a lot of us said, well, what are their internet connections going to be like? And so he said, well, that's not really an issue because they can go to the local library. Well, guess what the local library did the next day? So there's even these second order assumptions. Well, if they don't have it, they can do it here. So it's first and second order assumptions that are really being challenged here.
Yeah, that's a great takeaway. I'm going to ask, it feels like all I've done is talk a lot. And so I'm going to ask Erin to sort of frame the families discussion. And this is, I think, a little bit different than the external stakeholders. So it's not the families of our students, but it's our own families. One of those other sort of second order ones that Charles is talking about is it's really come to light what proportion of faculty care for other people, and it's lots of people. The American model is nuclear family, but what has become much more prevalent is we aren't just nuclear family caring. There's lots of other people for whom faculty are responsible, and that's putting an added set of emotional needs on us and our colleagues. So Erin can start framing that. for about 5 minutes, and then we'll go back into room.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. Yeah, I think so. I'm a parent myself, to two children, one being my husband, who's 42, and then also my adult son, who is 21, and two very large 2-year-old puppies that equate to around 85 kilos. So that has been my work from home environment. And something that, and we were all working from home at one point. And I'll also add to that, that my son, yes, he does live at home. My son also struggles with mental health issues, of depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, etc. So a lot of the discussion around working from home a lot of times was around what am I going to do with small children in daycare. But I think that there was some things being overlooked for those that had either older children, additional care responsibilities as well. Care responsibilities in Australia is quite large. A lot of people are providing in-home care for their adult parents, particularly with our large international population. People living, remotely. We almost learned more about the at-home situations of faculty than we probably ever would have been privy to know as well, which I think was actually really, at least for me, it was really tough in that of learning, who was a single parent or how many children. They're just not things a lot of times that people would, would talk about. And that kind of came to the forefront. And I think for some people, it's almost really confronting as well, with suddenly having people. It's one thing to have your professional life and what you share with people intentionally, and then another, kind of your more personal that is really on display as well. If you have, kids running in and out. I will apologize now. My dogs have just woken up because it's, just after 5 a.m. here. So you might, see them running around in the background. My husband just left, for work, and that's kind of become the new norm. But getting to a level of comfort, and also noticing some of the reactions as well. And I've noticed this in faculty meetings. So where you can see everybody's faces, and there have been some where you've seen, if a child has come in, where some of the people, they roll their eyes, or they do this, or they kind of do the look over to the side. And a lot of those nonverbal behaviors are really powerful. It's a really powerful message that is being sent to those individuals, because you can see it, but you don't want to ask, on that. And there hasn't been a lot of discussion. There's been a lot of discussion around support for individuals with younger children, and what needs to be done in terms of setup. When we talk about assumptions, again, a lot of assumptions that were made was that if you have a child at home, regardless of age, that's going to be doing online schooling, again, broadband. If you've got, we had 3 people on the internet at any given time. And we were fighting over things. I'm like, you're hogging the internet. No, you're hogging the internet. Now we're lucky. We all had our own personal devices. Not every family had that. And not every family has the opportunity to go out and buy an additional iPad or another computer, especially since everything was on back order you couldn't even get a webcam for 3 months. And, it's harder than getting people to share toys as well. And so these discussions, because they're so personal, and I don't know, are these things that should have been asked ahead of time of what are your care responsibilities? What opportunities do you have? What challenges are you going to have with that? And then what support is being provided for that? And I haven't really seen, I've heard a lot of talk around it. There's been heaps of discussion and heaps of checklists. Here are all the different things that you should do, and here's how you can maximize your time, and put this sign on your door. My dogs can open up my door. They just, get up and hit that and walk in. Kids are going to be be the same. But with that, it's, yes, we have these fantastic checklists, but we're not talking about what has worked, what has not worked. And then also just those, those feelings of vulnerability. We know that things such as having care responsibilities should not matter at work. We know that they shouldn't. We also know that in reality, they do as well. And there's, again, I come from an HR background, is a lot of things that we would not divulge have now been shared with individuals, a lot of times unintentionally. And are we thinking about, the long-term impact of that, or is it going to be, once we're back to, working in the office, that all of this is kind of forgotten about? Because it's not as if your care and parental responsibilities stop when you leave the house. It's always there. It's always in your mind. My son is always in my mind. If I'm at work, I'm always wondering, how he's doing and such. And so I think that there's just a lot of opportunities to open discussion, but how do we go about having those discussions?
Thanks, Erin. Wow. Okay. We have a lot to unpack, and it's not going to be done before the session is over. But I think the how is really an interesting framing question for breakout groups. Like, we know these things are happening. How do we have those conversations in ways that respect our ability to disclose or not disclose, or maybe that's even a foregone conclusion, like what we can see in our backgrounds, or what has been exposed that we may not have wanted to be exposed. What do we need to be talking about in terms of expanding the definition of caregiving? And Erin's right, I think it's really interesting to look at the writing out there. Most of what's out there is about parents with young children, and maybe elder care a little bit, but the great proportion of it is about small children. That is not to say that is not a significant issue. I think that there is, one of the reasons why we wanted to include this is that it's a disproportionate conversation. And so thinking about how do we include these other perspectives and pressures, and how do we stop making assumptions? So I'm going to get everybody in a room. Thank you very much. This is great. I wish it would go on all afternoon. Okay, here we go. Everybody's back. I have to tell you, this is so cool. I'm really glad that I got to do this with you guys.
Oh, Kathy has a new toy. This is
Kathy, you're just enjoying throwing us in and out of rooms arbitrarily.
It's
too much,
so fun.
too much.
You know what they say about absolute power.
Oh, I know, right, Melissa? I know.
Lord Acton.
I can mute people, and it's just really exciting. So what was cool, we have 7 minutes in our extended, it's a little bit like soccer extra minutes that the referee puts on, and we have like 7. So what was cool in your breakout groups? I heard some great stuff. Jeannie 4A.
I thought it was really interesting, and we only got this to like the last 30 seconds. The breadth of choice versus not choice that people have with their institutions to negotiate. It's like, if your manager's a good manager, you can get what you need, but if their manager is not a good manager, then it's way harder. And some institutions are being very directive, and others are being very accommodating. There's such a wide range of institutional responses. It doesn't feel like we're part of an academic community. We're all in our little institutional silos dealing with whatever our institution happens to want to do.
Well, but not calling anybody out. And just to follow up on what Jeannie was saying, what's interesting is there are these, my CSU system, all online. So the others we're all face to face. But then there are these people say they've got the option, but without calling out the school. I'm aware of a school that they say they've got the option, but they really don't. So what is that option? Is that how does that all play out? And is it real?
Well, I think it's interesting too, the extent to which we expect to be consulted. And the idea, what Jeannie is talking about, like the variability in our individual managers, I mean, that's the workplace. that's the workplace. Some of us had bad managers, some of us had great managers. And it's interesting to me that we note that there should be an institutional response, like there should be some sort of a baseline there, but that doesn't happen really anywhere other than academe. And I think it's really an interesting point, you know. What else?
I wonder if students are going to start to move from institution to institution based on the model that they choose.
Have you read anything about that, Ray, or are you just speculating?
I'm just a defensive pessimist.
Some of it is, I mean, how mobile? Like, well, you're in an area of the country where there are lots of choices. So some of that would be geographically limited, don't you think, in terms of the mobility? Or
well, one of the things we're already seeing at the Cal State is
John Stark. Let Ray answer really quick.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, well, I wasn't even thinking so much about geographical mobility since it's irrelevant right now. But I'm going to go to the university that's going to give me the best deal this fall. So I don't have to move.
I see what you mean. Okay, John.
Well, I was just going to say they're staying closer to home is what we're seeing.
Yeah.
So we're going to get students that would have gone to some of your universities, possibly, you know, Midwest or East Coast, and are going to stay here in California and stay local. That's what we're starting to see.
Yeah, for sure.
There's actually an enormous amount of data out there about price wars within the market, I mean, if you just follow the Chronicle inside higher ed, they report on that constantly. Yeah, there's an enormous amount of data out there. Federal data, it's all out there.
So students are going website to website. Like, what about what if there's an in-class component? Like, that's what's kind of confusing. Like, if they want to go face-to-face, or are you saying about all online? Like, I don't get it. How would they choose? Like Mary Grace, you put in there, how are they going to go somewhere else?
Because if we're offering the option to faculty to be online or in person, and another university is requiring all faculty to do a certain model, the student has a higher degree of predictability. In our case, a lot of the faculty who don't want to engage with students are preferring to teach remotely. It's not for health. It's more because they see it as a way to stay away more. And then the students respond badly because the faculty aren't skilling up to do this well, which is converting also into okay, well, the student's going to change to another school and get transfer credits for a semester or two.
I see.
But it's an expensive cost to the university.
Yeah, I see. Wow.
I just put in the chat what are the four primary characteristics that students are looking for right now.
Yeah.
If you're looking at the data and the literature.
Well, I can't give you data and literature, but N of 1 at my campus, we are seeing very little fall off. There's been no announcement of, the schedule says we are face to face, but who knows? The weird part that I found was in looking at the schedule, the classes, except for well-known good professors, the online classes are filling faster, which I find an interesting phenomenon.
Huh. Well, we have, and I'm sure, we have a lot of moving parts in terms of kids who can't come back, either by geography, so like our international students, financially. And so our model is we have blended or hybrid models or whatever. And if there is a student enrolled in our classes that has to be all online, we need to provide a way for that student to engage all online. And so it's kind of a multi-step approach, acknowledging that some students just can't get back. So it's complicated. Yeah, it's a complicated thing. I have us at 2:39. Brandon is going to stop the room soon.
Brandon.
Yeah. I don't even think it's him. I just think that it goes like this. But thanks, Brandon. Thank you, everybody, for participating, and the panelists for preparing such thoughtful comments. I learned a lot. And we'll see everybody maybe at Jim's place or at the Gather. So thank you all. Have a great afternoon. Appreciate it. Bye.